for coming. One of the great pleasures of working here is to be able to invite one's heroes to come and address distinguished audience such as this, and it's a particular pleasure to be able to celebrate Boualem Sansal today for reasons too obvious to enumerate. First, most obviously, his release from prison following the efforts of the French Republic and the personal intervention of the President of Germany. Second, also to celebrate his unanimous election week before last to the Académie Française. We will pass lightly over the fact that the Algerian dictatorship stripped him of his Algerian citizenship last week, but that may say more about present-day Algeria than it does about our guest of honor. I can't, for those of you who may not have read all of his works translated to English or in the original French, I can't recommend them enough, and in a moment of generosity, if anyone asks me for a copy of any of his wonderful novels, I may just, in a moment of indulgence, indulge you in that way. But it's a particular pleasure to be able to welcome him today, also to thank Her Excellency Hélène Duchesne, most capable French ambassador here in London, for her presence and support, but to also say how delighted we are that the in-conversation here between with Boualem Sansal should be conducted by our senior fellow, Sir Trevor Phillips, Britain's greatest broadcaster, and also for this, notice here, I want more, louder.
Take that, Andrew Neil.
If he's here today, are you here, Andrew? That was a risky moment. We're living dangerously, I think, but also because the other organisation which Trevor chairs, Index on Censorship, played its honourable part in calling for the release of our guest of honour today. So our guest of honour will talk for 15 minutes. Like the FLN leadership, we impose strict limits on the amount of time that individual comrades can speak, and then go in conversation with Trevor, and then questions from the audience. We will also have simultaneous translation, as we've had for past distinguished visitors from abroad. So if you can wait till the microphone comes to you, that's most welcome. Usual house rules, no question too outrageous. You simply have to state your name and organisation first. So welcome, thank you, look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Alors, qu'est-ce que vous voulez que je parle, debout, assis, couché?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Because I don't speak very loudly. But can you hear me? Please, can you hear me? Can you hear the English coming through? Can you hear the English interpretation coming through? Is the English coming through? Oh, maybe I'll have to speak like this, says Mr. Sansal. Now, I was told that I have 15 minutes and that I can talk about anything I like. And I thought, well, if I'm speaking to the English people, I should be talking about the weather and what sort of weather we have today. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to really look closely at the weather forecast on the television, so I think I'll talk to you about something completely different. I'll talk to you about three words which are the most important in the world. They've always been the most important words in the world. They still are, and they are even more important as we look to tomorrow. Let me say what they are. The first is causality. Causality between effect and cause. And it's a very mysterious word, nothing obvious about it. And if I had the time, I could develop it further. And I could explain to you how that you could get to the greatest minds in the world who would spend their entire lives trying to work out what exactly is meant by causality. The second word is more startling, and that's locality. In our minds, a phenomenon always has a link to a place. Everything happens and is connected to its place. And if I can move on from place, I move on to the third, and that is coordinating, that is, linking where we are and what we're looking at. That's the outset. The coordinates. And those are the three words that have been important in the Western world, but also in the Islam world. That is, when way back when there was the outset and the so this is a fundamental question, fundamental matter that mankind questions himself in world. It is, but we must be able to question divinity. But in Islamic world, there is no questioning of the divine. We didn't hear that word very clearly. What was the third word again? Coordinates. Coordinates, or where you are, your place, your address, coordinates. Where are you? And because of your coordinates, when you know where you are, then it's better. It helps us to better understand what your starting point is, where you are in the world. Causality, then. And let me give you an example. I drop my pen and it falls. That's the effect. But what is the cause? And it's taken centuries to find the cause and effect between that simple event. Why does it fall? Well, it's because, is it because I wanted it to be so? Is it because of magic? Or why does that happen? But after centuries, after many centuries, it took an Englishman, Newton, to discover that the object falls. Why? Because of gravity. That's the cause. And the mystery is gravity, and we've come up with a logical explanation for all of this. But this began with Galileo and Newton, and then 2 centuries later, someone came and said that the causality was infinitely more complicated than that. So first explanation was gravity, because the Earth has huge mass and naturally attracts objects. Right? Objects are attracted through gravity. So you will understand that this is a force that is pulling an object towards Earth. And then Einstein came up with an overwhelming response. He's saying, no, it's not force that's pulling the object. It's because space is rounded, and if you put something on a sheet, you pull the sheet, and the object will go up in the air, and you let it to drop, and then it falls. That was the explanation of space becoming misshapen, and that means then that time is misshapen. And so that if you were here at 11:12, I'm here at 11:13 in the morning. We're not in the same time. And if one thing moves compared to the other, then maybe it will be 8 minutes past 12, past noon, and I might still be at 11 o'clock or so. So time changes. Now, let me come to locality. I have a phenomenon occurring here. I try to explain it through the causes around it. And Einstein said, well, it's space that is becoming misshapen. In other words, the entire universe is changing, is moving, and that's causing the pen to drop. It's terrifying, really. And let me come back to the subject at hand. We have quite naturally an impression that today's problems are the result of an economic crisis. Things aren't going well in the world economy. The economy is creating distortions. We have workers, and it's causing more poverty. It's having an effect, creating inequalities, and that the economy is no longer a source of wealth, but it's a source of inequality, of distortions. And inequalities shouldn't be seen as fundamentally bad. If I'm in an inferior position, I might move forward and take an opportunity, move forward. And let me move to Islamism. If I say one thing, you might not react. And if you are being attacked by Islamism, you will then react. And that happens, actually, Islamism is doing me a favor. Because if this might have an effect on our society. And that's what the West has done this until I would say, 1960s, 1970s. And we would say, okay, Islam is there, well, that's fine. Hinduism is there, and Islam has its place, just as other faiths do. And that's how we approach things. But then it went one step too far. What it did was it changed causality and it changed locality. It destroyed those two elements that are fundamental for us. And so in my mind, I can come up with cause and effect. I can define things as they relate to a particular place. I might think there's no danger, but on the one hand, you shift it ever so slightly and it becomes a huge danger. Islamism today has brought us to reflect on these matters. And we're still refusing to think about them because they're too complicated. And I feel that those who have the duty to reflect and to reflect on the world are no longer doing it out of fear, ignorance, because of rules, because of custom. Because, for instance, it's felt that, well, in public you don't use swear words. Well, that's a convention. But you could say shit if you wanted, merde shit, you could if you want. But we're imprisoned by these conventions. And there are people who perhaps feel that they are at the sacred level, and they are saying that these are conventions and that these conventions are sacred. And we accept to be submissive to them, to be in a position of inferiority. It's a matter of blasphemy. Communism, for instance, arrived in Europe with another way of defining causality, coordinates, and locality. And for a while, Lenin would say, well, what goes for the entire planet and not just Russia, of course. So for a while, causality took over. And the example was a physical one. Something swells and it pushes other things to the sidelines. And we in the West, we have values of liberty, etc., have been shunted aside. And he who is defining the terms, the rules, these are Muslims. It's Islamism that is doing so in a fast, violent, and aggressive way. And the rest is being pushed aside. And you are being ignored. Europe is being ignored. Why? Because very quietly you're sitting to one side. And very often in Islamism it is said, you have a watch, but we have time. And now let me come back to me personally. I am Algerian, or at least I was, not quite sure. I was born in Algeria, a socialist country, living a quiet life. And then one day, just like Einstein would have put it, suddenly space began to shift and change around me, and we could hardly understand what was happening. Borders were shifting. And suddenly, the Algerian, who previously enjoyed many rights, suddenly saw that his rights were very limited. And slowly, bit by bit, society began to change. And then we were faced with a problem that you today are very much confronted with, and that is how do we approach this? How do we analyze it? What about causality, locality, and coordinates or place or coordinates? Because that is Islam. People have a fuzzy idea of it, and they look at it and they say, no, Islamism is not Islam. It's Islamism, which is an invention of the West to understand Islam, to create a counter-current, and that's where it started. And Muslims in the 19th century had an incredible name. They talked about the Renaissance of Islam, because Islam had died at the time of the Enlightenment in the West, and then the Islamic Empire had fallen away, it died out, and Muslims were living at a time of nostalgia, looking back to wonderful Islam, the time of the Prophet. And the idea was, no, we have to breathe new life into Islam. It was called Rada. And so all Muslim countries had parties called the Ada, or meaning Renaissance. So Renaissance for the Nada was a way to punish others, punish in the West, the English, the French, the Russians, because they were the ones who had destroyed the Muslim empire. So we came to a second idea, which was to punish these worlds who had caused the dying out of that empire. And much thought was given to this. But Islamists were a lot more clever than we were. And so they used a judo technique. They were using no effort whatsoever, just like a judo player, for instance. All you have to do is set up 2 or 3 small bombs, and then London falls into a state of psychosis, and a country that is gripped by terror can be made to do what you want. And that's the situation that we're in. And to find a way out, we have to think about what Camus said. Camus said, you have to improve the values in the world. And that's where we are. That's where we stand now. We haven't done that. I don't know how many of you would accept to stand in the street and say that the problem is with Islam. But I have a right to say that I don't like it. But actually, no, you're told you cannot say it anymore. And vocabulary is no longer being decided upon by us. It's being decided by the Islamists, by Islam. It's an atomic bomb. And the racist word in the religious sense of the term also is what is a Muslim? What is the racist meaning? And this has snuffed out debate. People don't talk. And people ask a question, but you don't dare answer it. People will say, oh, that you're anti-this, and you're not a Democrat if you say this. And there is no answer. You say nothing. And you put a scarf on, you put 2 ties on, I don't care. But there's no discussion. Now, you'll note that I often talk about physics because I'm a scientist by training. We are faced with a situation where we're completely limited in what we can do. We're stuck. Camus, when looking at the absurdity of the world, said, if I am alone in revolting, in taking action, then I might as well commit suicide. That's the only philosophical solution, because I'm all alone in my corner. The world is absurd. What to do? I just become disconnected from life. So the only philosophical solution is suicide. However, if there's a collective response, it's a very different situation, because we should be in a state of recovery. That's what we need, and it's something that needs to be organized. It's not something done off the cuff. And Camus said that when a movement of revolt becomes collective, it becomes a revolution. And that's what we must do. Because today, in the Western world, which I am part of, just as many Arabs are, many Africans are, who are part of this thought process in the West, feel the need to organize collectively, to face disorder in the world and the upset in the world. What is all that is bad in the world coming from Islamism? And there are words that tend Arabic Muslim world. These are words that can be used to hide things, and we need to better understand this so as to come up with a revolution, a collective strategy. For years, I've been an activist saying that solutions won't come from power. The powers in place are there to manage from day to day, manage things. So who's going to bring about change? What are the forces of change? Where will they come from? From society? Well, from elites, from intellectuals. It's intellectuals who must get together, not individually. They must come together collectively and launch a thought movement so that we look at reality, we look and set a clear objective and put in place a process to get there. That's what the intellectuals did in the 17th and 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment. There were many extraordinary personalities at the time, and it was when they came together, they were called the encyclopedists. When they came together, then the Enlightenment began, and there was light. But we know that we have to see light, and then we must walk towards it. Thank you.
Alors, Boualem, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
To attempt to interview Boualem in French. I was warned off this 20 years ago when I told an entire room of French politicians after I'd made a speech in French that I had had some assistance from my teacher, and I used the word, I should have used obviously the word professeur, but I in fact used the word maîtresse. So there was a sort of silence in the room. I still think that they weren't particularly shocked by the idea of being helped by your mistress, but just the fact that an Englishman would have a mistress was what seems strange to French people. Let me start with something that you said. I'm really glad. I too started life as a scientist, and I was very pleased to see Newton and Einstein showing up. But you also went back to Galileo. And you will, I was going to say you will remember, neither of us was there, but you know that Galileo, after his trial, said, "Épée se muove," it still moves. And he said it under his breath. They still send him off to house arrest. But have we not learnt the lesson that in some circumstances it may not be useful to speak loudly? Galileo spoke softly, and at least he kept his head. Why do you choose to speak loudly?
I'll find a microphone. Can you hear me? Yes? Can you hear? Peut-être on va essayer de parler un tout petit peu.
Ouais. Non mais je peux pas parler comme ça.
I'll try to move closer to the microphone. I can't hear very well and I can't talk very loudly, so it's not easy for me to talk in public events. However, my voice is very faint. I have made a choice. Comes a moment you have to make a choice, or you have to give the impression that you make a choice. As I tend to say, sometimes I make blunders. I say things and I don't really realize. I just talk naturally as people would talk among themselves. I would make no difference if I talk to someone in particular or to the public. I say the same things. But I'll tell you what happened, the process. I'm Algerian. I was living in Algeria. That's the Mediterranean. It's a quiet place, and people live simply but well. And at one point, there was a kind of a tectonic shock that upset the structures of the country. But we didn't see anything. We sort of realized gradually, because people started to, men had beards, and this wasn't the case when I was a young boy. We knew about Che Guevara, for example, far away. And then we realized that it wasn't only that. Society was being transformed, and it got transformed in 10 years. In 10 years, we became 100% Muslim, but radical Muslim. We must do this and not do that, and this and that. At the time, I was what we call in French Islamo-gauchiste, leftist and Islamist, all in one. And I spoke up and said, well, this is a bit of an aggression to have to behave like this and be violent like this. So we try to understand, we try to make allowances and do some pedagogy. I don't know whether you know the expression Mithridat. With Mithridat, you'd give a little bit of poison to someone. It doesn't matter very much. And then the day after, you increase the dosage. And the third day, you increase again. And the body gets used to the poison. And afterwards, if you give a glass of poison, nothing happens. And so that is the technique used by Islamists. A little bit more every day, never too much, but just incremental intensity. With governments, we must close synagogues, churches, we must remove foreigners, and this undermines governments. The government is undermined when society itself is undermined. So what can the government rely on to oppose a kind of a huge a tidal wave that is against it? When rape is impossible to resist, just go on with it. And that is a little bit what is happening at the moment. I'm ashamed to say that I think I was an Islamo-gauchiste, leftist and Islamist. What is the limit? The limit is that one day, what was accepted was a reason to have a civil war, and it was a reason to kill people on both sides. So when you are an intellectual, you're not used to weapons, you're not used to fighting in the maquis. You want to bring something to the debate, to the table. So we sort of talked in Algeria with people who were in favor of human rights, with writers, and so I became part of that movement of intellectuals. And I wondered, how can we fight against a religion? Islamists do things that are forbidden with the police and other authorities, but how can we fight against Islam when it is strangling society like a snake? Can we replace it by another religion? Do we promote values of freedom and others? So we were thinking among ourselves with these intellectuals what we could do. And one day we found a solution. We thought, we can't do anything ourselves because we don't have the economic means to create a movement in society. People work and they earn money. So we don't have much money, we don't have the knowledge. And it is the point where one of the members of the group said, Eureka, I think I found the solution. We are going to internationalize this conflict. We're going to go to Europe and tell them, in Europe, what is happening here is going to happen to you. Because this goes beyond the local perimeter, the coordinates I was talking about earlier. This fight is not only French or English, it is something that is happening in the whole world. It is a movement that is not going to stop by itself. So we thought we would start writing. So we started to write memoranda, and we talked to journalists in Europe. They listened a little bit, and then we started writing to heads of state. We said, careful, watch out. We have a war in our country that is already there, and one day it will come to you by immigration or television or other means. But nobody listened. So our group was disbanded, and most of them were assassinated. I'm not sure who killed them, but maybe Islamists or the authority, because people in power don't like a third way. If there is a third solution, a third way, they're not comfortable with it. They don't want things to change. So Islamists tried to manipulate leftist Islamists, of which I was part of. And they tend to assimilate us to cholera or other epidemics. So we had to build a resistance, a way of fighting against this. But then it became illegible. There was no real strategy. Today, the Islamo-gauchists are a help to the Islamists, and the press is very lenient as well. So that meant that it was very difficult, and the solution was worse than the disease. People started fleeing, and then the movement was very difficult to stem, because when people start running, you need to know where you're running to. I'm very talkative.
You do words. I want to make sure that we have enough time for a few questions from the audience. But let me ask you about something you've just raised. You called yourself previously an Islamo-gauchiste. Do you feel let down, betrayed, and I think that's a better French word, by the French left?
Je dirais
More than betrayed, I would say. When you're in jail, you lose the habit of talking into a microphone. More than betrayed, I would say. The left wanted to kill me or to silence me at least, because the danger with my thoughts. A lot of people listen to me in France. Maybe it is the far right, or maybe other people on the right, or other people from the left who are not Islamo-gauchiste. So I was becoming a danger to some people. So the left in France got friendly with the power in Algeria to try and silence me. The Algerian authorities was threatening me, and the Algerian left also wanted to silence me. But for the moment, they're not very sure how to do that, because I have a lot of visibility and people acknowledge my presence in such a way that they don't really know how to handle me. They don't want to be on the wrong side. So that's where we are.
French, we're not sure if you are in any way Algerian. You're not sure if you are Algerian, I think. But let's pick up what you said about the West. I was very struck by a phrase you used. You said that the West had invented Islamism. Can you explain why you think that happened? And what you meant?
Ouais. Non.
What I meant by that was that humanity as a whole goes from one theory to another. Before that, it was communism, and then liberalism, and then another type of new liberalism. So we are moving forward, and it's like a boat. It needs to be on water. So humanity is a heavy body, and it needs to sail on a current of ideas. Otherwise, humanity stops and we become animals, and we eat, sleep, and reproduce ourselves. That's it. So we need ideologies, whether metaphysical or religious, but we need something to sail on. I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Needed to create this concept of Islamism in the way that you mentioned.
Oui.
Yes. The idea at the beginning that I forgot to say is that we can't really fight. We're a little bit like children. We don't have the means. So we exported the problem to Europe, to people who had the means and to have laws and structures and everything. They can cope with that, and they will be able to fight against Islamism. They will vanquish. And if they can do that, then it will spread. But it was a fundamental mistake to think in those terms, because I think that perhaps we were in a better shape to fight against Islamism because we knew Islam from the inside. Sorry. What did I do? So, I can't touch that. Okay? Okay, so we thought we'd send the baby and the bathwater to Europe, and they can cope with it. But to start with, we thought that if an ideology fails somewhere, it is going to fail everywhere. And if you keep on feeding what rots, then everything is going to rot. But in fact, Europe had stalled at that point. Europe didn't really have any predominant ideology. There was Christianity, Judaism, other ideologies were sort of out of breath. So Islamism appeared as something marvelous. Yesterday I was talking to some friends, and I mentioned how this came about at the end of the 18th century with the rise of European countries and Enlightenment and the radical change in paradigm, the structures of society, really. Muslim countries, Islam diminished and went back in Arab countries with the rise of Europe and the ideas in Europe. And there was also the army and companies, powerful companies in Europe. And Islam was really very much diminished. And the last gasp was the abolition of the caliphate in Turkey, because this world exists with the representative, with God, its representative, and the caliph. It is the same in Iran. If the symbol of the representative of God falls, everything falls. The rest will follow.
One last quick question from me, then let's go to our audience. Given what you just said, do you think that there is, or let me be more precise. Can you hear? Can you hear?
Il n'y a plus de traduction.
There's no more translation.
Ah, okay.
Maybe the plug. Yeah.
You go.
Ah oui, c'est bon. Okay.
C'est bon?
Oui.
Okay.
Oui.
Can you envisage a form of a Muslim majority polity state which could essentially which is compatible with the idea and practice of freedom of expression of the kind that we believe that we have, say, in this country, to some extent in France?
Moi, franchement, je vais.
Well, let me be quite frank. I wouldn't bank on it. I wouldn't bank on that happening. Democracy cannot take root in a Muslim country, particularly not Muslim countries at war and that are under dictatorships, because these dictatorships stifle debate and stifle discussion, like we're here in this room discussing these. In Algeria, I could never speak openly in public. I had to ask for authority, for the authorization from the police to do so, and I didn't get that. And you could just something that is simply out of the question. And if you are to continue with that line of thought, we'll continue on with what we're seeing, with countries failing, one after the other. We saw what's happened in Belgium. We see what's happening here in England, in France, in Germany. One after the other. These countries are affected. And if you go along with that, then you'll be working hand in hand with what's against you. That is, you really want to bring about democracy in a closed society that is governed by religion and religion alone. You will fail, and you will fail spectacularly. You have to set up barriers, in my view. It's the only way. It's the only way to go about it. It took a world war to put an end to Nazis. I'm not saying that we need a world war, maybe not a military war, but we do need to rearm ourselves morally to stand off, to fend off what we have ahead of us. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows this, yet, but we keep the same narrative, trying not to offend, so that we're not called Islamophobes, so that we're not called racists. But no, let's look reality in the face. Let's look at the real causes of it. All these solutions that are being bandied about here and in France are only worsening the situation. We have to have the right arms to deal with this.
Go to our audience, but I just wanted to. It's very interesting that you just used I suppose, what's in that period, a previous period we might have described as a moral rearmament, the concept of moral rearmament, which is something which the leader of the movement we call Blue Labour here spoke about on Sunday. Those of you who watched him on television, I should tell you, we got a lot of calls afterwards saying, "Is Maurice Glassman on drugs?" Okay, let's open it out. Lady here. Wait for the microphone, please. Yeah.
Bonjour, Chloé Goodenoft, journaliste.
Hello, I'm a journalist from France, from Opinion in France. I have 3 questions. You are not making any distinction between Islam and Islamism. Do you think that all Muslims are a problem? There are plenty of Muslims living their lives. Are they causing a problem? Second question, you are faced with what you express as a dichotomy, but the West isn't perfect. We see Western elites that cause a lot of issues. So I think if there's opposition between one and the other, this could be difficulty. We've got a lot that we're guilty of. And then thirdly, you're saying that this is happening here now. What do you mean by that?
Sorry, I'm going to hustle everybody up because we are short of time. So let's get our questions and our answers in quickly. Boualem, do you want to respond to that?
Oui.
Well, you've got Islam and you've got Muslims, 2 different things. And Muslims is not one homogeneous body. It's like you've got Algerians, you've got Saudi Arabians, different groups. Muslims live in different countries, and they will be different depending on the country they come from. I'm talking about ideology. Islam is an ideology, like other ideologies. It has a idea of supremacy. And religions are born based on a lot of learning. You'll have the prophet who explains this and that. But then after a while they decide, no, we're not explaining anything else. This is the way things are, period. And in the West, we've just become used to this, that there are absolute truths and that we don't question them. Among Muslims, there are those who have become radicalized, some more than others. In England, there are many Muslims who are fully integrated into society and who are perhaps more English than the English, just as we see Algerians in France who are more French than the French. And for them, France is paradise. It's the paradise they would never have had with Islam. And we see them in everyday life in France. So no, there is a difference. You mentioned the word dichotomy. And I'm saying, no, we're looking at a process between 1 and 0. There's an infinity of possibilities. all sorts of nuances are possible. So no, it's not a dichotomy, and it's precisely because there is no clear dichotomy that it's difficult to resolve it, that it's complicated. It's like in American films that show you the end of the world, and you have people in these films that are living in ghettos, and then there are others who are able to look forward. That's a dichotomy. I was imprisoned. I was in prison, and I was astonished that I felt admiration for Islamists. There was a leader, an Islamist, a war leader, who was the head of the resistance movement, and he was just 16. Why? Because his entire family had been murdered. They were suspected of having supported wrong people. He was just 16 years old. He became leader of the resistance, leader of a group, and he was a great fighter, and he became leader of the group. And he was one of the last resistance leaders to have been arrested some 8 years ago. He was the last one. And so here we have this person. And I found that he was a man of incredible intelligence. It was astounding to see how he didn't ask for anything, and he was there in the courtyard. He was cleaning everything up. He was looking after everyone. He was still a leader. He was acting as a leader, looking after his people. And I've always been a fighter myself. And we didn't know how to speak to one another. He spoke Arabic, I spoke French. And he chatted with his friends, and he come back to me and he said, "Oh, Mr. Sansal, how are you?" And so anything's possible. Anything is possible when you talk to individuals, to people on an individual basis, but that's not always the case. So we became friendly. We didn't speak the same language. I had respect for him. He had respect for me. We admired each other. But I know that he could quickly take up arms against me. We're talking about ideology. We're talking about political, religious systems. And we see the balance of powers and philosophies that are in the mix. It's very complex. We can't talk about a dichotomy because there's an infinity of issues.
Thank you, Trevor. My name's Paul Stott. I work here at Policy Exchange. My question is around the issue of Islamophobia, and the British government set up a working group last year to develop a definition of Islamophobia. I wonder if you think that will help things, and your broader views on the issue of Islamophobia, which obviously we've touched on Islam and the left, and one of the things really that has been birthed by that relationship is the concept of Islamophobia, I would argue.
Okay, we are at the end of our time, but I hope everybody's okay for another 5 minutes, 10 minutes or so. Go ahead.
Oui.
Well, I do feel that we're at a time of truth, and we see that the world is going downhill at a very quick rate. It's destroying countries, and it's destroying futures. And I would say at the very least, intellectuals have to step up and speak out. It's up to them to speak out. So I would say yes. I was an Islamo-gauchiste. I was on the left with Islam. And I would say that at the time, Islamists had one duty, and that was to kill and take over the planet. And so when I was confronted with that, I stood up against it. And does that make me Islamophobic? Well, it does, in that I'm frightened of this ideology that has its effect on people's minds, on the minds of young kids, 11, 12 years old. They're angels, they're innocent, and they are taken over by this ideology. So that's why it's a combat. We have specialists here to talk about Islamophobia. We have those who can look at it and who can deal with Secret Service and the police to this up because it's a form of criminality. But with religion, it's difficult to know how to deal with the religious aspects. And first of all, you can start by saying, I'm frightened, I'm terrified by Islamism, because we don't know exactly what we mean by that. Well, you can talk about rights, but what do you mean by rights? Rights come from God. And if you hear that, what can you say in response?
I may intervene here, is that the concern about the definition of Islamophobia is not just what are the words, but the idea that a definition of Islamophobia, which is to some extent subjective, which can be interpreted by, let's say, a university authorities or the municipality or whoever, can be used as a way of silencing certain points of view by deeming them in practice Islamophobic. And I think that the question here is, it relates to a point that you made, essentially, that Islamists, little bit by little bit, infiltrate, poison the well, as your point you were making about poison water, and that the definition of Islamophobia is a way of achieving that outcome.
Well, clearly, in any combat, in any war, be it a physical or an intellectual combat, you have to have a strategy. And we see that we look at what Islamism is today, and we need a strategy to deal with it. What will Islamism look like in 15 years, 20 years down the road? I don't know. But Islam, after a few waves of radicalization, has come up with Salafism. Salafism. It is a religion with a prophet, and the objective of any religion is to convert everyone, and to say God has said you will go out there and convert all, and if necessary by force. And just a few moments ago, I was talking about Islamists in the 18th century who had started that movement, but it immediately became a divided movement. Some saying, we are going to take over the world, we will conquer the world. And we will live like the Prophet lived. We will have a grand Muslim civilization, and along the way we will convert everyone. And okay, that sort of works in part. And we have all these discussions in the West about it. Others were saying, no, that's not the solution, because God is not negotiating, wanting people to negotiate with people to believe. It's an order from on high, and that's jihadism. That's what jihadism. Islamists are saying, you Salafists, no, you're not going to do it that way. We're going to use force. And they have it. They have Daesh to do that. They have other methods. And you could also look at Islamism of the Enlightenment. And we've seen examples in France. What's the name? The Tunisian. What's his name? Yeah, I think there are 10 or more of them who are saying, no, we're going to use the idea of enlightenment, Islam of the Enlightenment. And that is an intelligent design, so to speak. And the idea is not to kill you and to take your place. No, it's to make you a brother. And you won't be able to resist that. They will make you a happy brother who will then defend and who will be willing to make sacrifices. And then there's another Islam, which has just been born today. And they're very much like Islamo-gauchiste. You feel sympathy. They feel sympathy for Islam as a revolutionary movement, not as a religion, but as a revolutionary movement to transform society, to redress the balance of powers. And these are different currents, 3 or more, are all coming together. And they're not in keeping with each other. You've got the jihadists who are taking on the other currents of thought. Islam is so complicated for the Western world that you can do nothing because you just don't know.
Last question, colleague Emmanuel.
Just very quickly. Sorry. Just very quickly, the real issue is that we have the issue of definition of Islamism. The West is confused with it. The Muslim world's confused with it. I think what we need to do is go back to Islam and look at the real word that actually defines that, which is the Khawarij. These are the people who killed Khalifa Ottoman and Khalifa Ali to try and divert from Islam, and they've done that. Then it was taken over lately in the last century or so by Wahhabism, Salafism, and then lately now Muslim Brotherhood to make that more international appeal. So I think what we need to do is get our definition right to allow everybody to tackle this. Is that so?
Absolutely. At the beginning, when Islamism started, it was preaching, perhaps in mosques and underground. It was very discreet. These people came from Saudi Arabia or the Yemen or Iran. And sometimes they were even supported by embassies from these countries, and they were preaching, and they were allowed to preach. Preaching is not banned, fortunately, in the West at least. But comes a point that we saw that Islam got changed. It transformed itself. Islamism was used in order to vouch for Islam. Islam is a religion based on the Prophet. But they understood that today in the 21st century, it is no longer like in the 14th century. Countries have a structure and they are organized around laws. It's not just like little compounds in the desert. So how do we go about converting societies? In the Judaism and Christianity, conversions were happening in the desert. Very few people, 1 person, 2 people, 3. So people had to get organized, and Islam had to build strategies that were very complex. For example, infiltration into society. You have to break up the fabric of society. You have to devalue other people's values so that the West starts doubting that everybody is corrupt. It is a real work of undermining other people's values. So I think that at the beginning we were very embarrassed. Do we criticize Islamism, or do we need to go back to the root? That is very tricky. We have to think very carefully, because among Muslims, there are a lot of people who think that people are not threatening, but they are part of the system nonetheless. So how do we do that?
carry on this conversation until tea time. But unfortunately, there are people here who have to earn an honest living and go back to work. But this has been a fascinating conversation. So my job simply to say thank you so much, Boualem, for your conversation this lunchtime.